We'll see how far we get. So just to kind of get a sense of place here, in chapters 1 through 3, we've seen the people of Israel kind of give a summary of their journey from the Red Sea up to the Transjordan. They still haven't entered or crossed the Jordan. We'll see that in chapter 6. In chapter 4, we've got what you might want to think of as the preamble to the Ten Commandments. So we've seen the Ten Commandments in Exodus. They're also in Deuteronomy 5, and we'll look at them next week as a group. But chapter 4 is sort of the run-up to the Ten Commandments. So let's take a look at what's going on in 4. As you probably know, right, the preamble to something kind of lets you know the context for what follows. And that's certainly the case here with Deuteronomy 4. So here's Deuteronomy 4:1 and following. And now, O Israel, listen to the statutes and rules that I am teaching you, to do them, that you may live, and go in and take possession of the land that the Lord, the God of your fathers, is giving you. You shall not add to the word that I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God that I am commanding you. Your eyes have seen what the Lord did at Baal Peor. For the Lord your God destroyed from among you all the men who followed the Baal of Peor. But you held fast to the Lord your God and are still alive today. See, I have taught you statutes and rules, as the Lord my God commanded me, that you should do them in the land that you are entering to take possession of it. So, first thing that we want to sort of stop and take note of here. We kind of don't think of this much anymore because, we tend to think of land as simply real estate, right? There's land out there, you want it, you offer somebody, the current owner, what you think is the good price. You buy it, the title gets transferred to you, and then you pay taxes on it and build something on it or don't build something on it. We just want to remember here that the land that's being given to Israel is a blessing of the covenant, not a possession. And that's a really important distinction. That is, Israel here never, ever owns the land that they're settling in. Rather, it's a blessing that's attached to the covenant. And that means, and that's what Moses is letting them know right away here, right? That faithfulness to the covenant allows them to dwell in the land. Unfaithfulness to the covenant could cause them to lose the blessing of the land. So that's a really important point, okay? So blessings here are for an obedient and faithful people. When people sort of act in such a way that they show that those blessings really don't matter to them, or that they're unwilling to sort of live into the covenant, then the blessings are temporarily, I say temporarily, removed, okay? We'll see here later on that at a number of points, Israel was actually exiled from her land. The big exile takes place in 586 BC with the Babylonian conquest, and the people of Israel literally are removed from the land and brought to different places in Babylon as a result of their unfaithfulness. So we just want to note here that the covenant brings with it various blessings that God gives to his people, but these blessings are not kind of like possessions, okay? They're contingent on faithfulness. So that's the point that Moses is making here. Now, he's going to make a second point here that I'm going to read to you. And so this is important too. So we've got the land as a covenant blessing. And now Moses is going to say something very important about the law itself. See, I've taught you rules and statutes that the Lord my God commanded me, that you may do them in the land that you are entering to take possession of it. Keep them and do them, for that will be your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples, who when they hear all these statutes will say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what great nation is there that has a God so near to it as the Lord our God is to us, whenever we call upon him? And what great nation is there that has statutes and rules so righteous as all this law that I have set before you today? Only take care and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, and lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and your children's children, how on the day that you stood before the Lord your God at Horeb, that is Mount Sinai, the Lord said to me, gather the people to me, that I may let them hear my words, so that they may learn to fear me all the days that they live on the earth. So a couple of really important themes there. The most important one is this. Now, we tend to think of the law as kind of like bad, right? There's a strong, what's called antinomian strain in American culture, right? We don't like laws, we don't like regulations, right? Although we need them. Okay? If society was simply like a free-for-all, right, we'd all be worse off. But unfortunately, right, there's sort of a Christian antinomianism which kind of looks back on the Old Testament and says, oh my gosh, the Old Testament was awful. There were like all these laws and rules and regulations people had to do. It must have been terrible. That's never the way the Old Testament presents it. As a matter of fact, notice here that Moses speaks of the law, the Torah, that God gives to Israel on Mount Sinai, as a form of wisdom. Now, what's being talked about here? I think it's something like this. It's really, really, really important to understand that the law of the Old Testament isn't just simply sort of like a set of arbitrary rules and regulations, somewhat like the U.S. tax code, right? You know, nobody can make head or sense of it except for really, really high-priced tax lawyers, and probably not even them. But it's really important that there's actually a rationale behind the Old Testament law, and it's this. The heart of the Old Testament law is to bring about a wise ordering of human life. And that wise ordering has two components. Component number one, a wise society is a society in which people are properly related to God. Component number one. Okay? For the Old Testament, right, you can't have a properly ordered or wise society unless that society is properly oriented and related to God. That's the vertical relationship. Component number two, you can't have a wise or well-ordered society unless people are properly related to one another. That's the horizontal relationship. Okay, so when Moses here describes the law as being wise, he means just that. That is, that the purpose of the law is actually to relate people properly to God, and then also to begin to relate them properly to one another. It's a wise order, and here we just want to remember, right, that we've seen since Genesis 3 a world plunged into the chaos of sin. The purpose of the Old Testament law is to begin the process of putting that chaos under control so that order reemerges, okay? No one does well in chaos. We require order to live decently and fulfilled lives. Now, let me read to you part of Psalm 119, which I think makes this point in a way that is kind of far. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. Really important point here. It's a point that our society has sort of forgotten, but wisdom and intelligence are two different things. Some people have lots of intelligence, but very little wisdom. The idea here is the purpose of Torah, the purpose of law, right, is to even enable those who might be sort of lower down on the intelligence scale to be wise. I think that's an important thing to remember, sort of like in a highly technological society where we think we sort of like know everything, and that makes us infallible. The precepts of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The rules of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, even much fine gold. Notice that you get this sense here, right, that the law that God's giving to his people, right, is something which induces wisdom, it induces joy, and it's to be sought after far more than the most valuable thing that any society could sort of ever want. In this case, it's gold. In our case, right, it might be something else. But this is the most valuable thing to which anyone could ever aspire, God's sort of own way for ordering human life and ordering human society. And so Moses says, look, this is what the Lord your God's giving you. And when people hear about the content of that law, they're going to say, oh my gosh, these people are really blessed. I wish we had something even half that good. Okay, it's really important to get this. Okay, so Moses is making the point, right, that the law here is actually a blessing from God that the people really should be grateful for, and that even if they're not, right, there are going to be other peoples around who are going to be saying, wow, I wish we had something like that. Instead we've only got, old King so-and-so over there who's like a fool or who's like greedy and siphoning off all our money or whatever, right? I wish we had something that was like that. And also, too, notice this theme here. It's really, really important for the people of Israel to make sure that they pass along the law of God to their children and to their children's children. It's really important, okay? I think this is something that, sometimes, we in the church tend to forget, right? It's like the kind of a somewhat famous theologian who used to teach at Duke University named Stanley Hauerwas. He said that, that it's really important that we remember that Christianity is not, you don't get Christianity by osmosis, right? You don't get Christianity simply by being in a culture where there are churches. That's not how it happens. Rather, he says, right, it's the church's task and mission to make sure that our children and our children's children are being formed in the faith. That's really important. And so Moses is making sure the people of Israel do that. Now, I'm going to pick things up here at 4:11. Here we're remembering the events of Mount Sinai, although here in Deuteronomy it's referred to as Mount Horeb, so don't get confused. It's the same mountain, they're just different names. And you came and stood at the foot of the mountain, while the mountain burned with fire to the heart of heaven, wrapped in darkness, cloud, and gloom. Then the Lord spoke to you out of the midst of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but you saw no form. There was only a voice. And he declared to you his covenant, which he commanded you to perform. That is, the 10 Commandments. Here, the Hebrew actually says the 10 words. I'll say more about that next week, but usually English translations render them as 10 Commandments, not 10 words. And he wrote them on tablets of stone, and the Lord commanded me at that time to teach you the statutes and rules that you might do them in the land that you are going over to possess. So, really important little reminder here. This is sort of the preface for what's coming next. Moses reminds the people of Israel that their ancestors, remember this is the generation that came through the wilderness, not the original Exodus generation. Moses reminds them, right, that your ancestors came to Mount Sinai, and they had an actual encounter with God at the mountain. And that encounter was awe-inspiring, right? The mountain was wrapped in clouds. There was thunder. There was lightning. The mountain shook. There was fire at the top of the mountain. It was sort of like this overwhelming experience because it was an experience of God. And then Moses reminds them of this, that you saw no form, there was only a voice. Now this is the preface to what's going to be said in a few minutes about the making of idols. So let me just say a word about that before we read on in verse 15. There's a really important thing that's going on here about idols. Obviously, Israel is going into a land that's full of idols. So we just want to remember right here that in the ancient world, temples were not places of congregational worship. Temples were primarily the house built for the statue or image of a god or goddess. Okay, so they're all over the place. The idea here is that the God of Israel cannot be imaged in a way that sort of human beings concoct, because he's so alive, so real, that no image could actually even remotely begin to capture him. And therefore, all images that human beings might make of him will fall radically and far short of the reality so as to be false. Okay, that's a really important point. So notice what comes next about idolatry. And this is sort of a preface right to the second commandment that we'll be reading about in Deuteronomy 5, 8 through 10. Therefore, watch yourselves very carefully, since you saw no form on the day the Lord spoke to you at Horeb, out of the midst of the fire. Beware lest you act corruptly by making, and this is really important, a carved image for yourselves. Okay, that's really important. In the form of any figure, the likeness of male or female, the likeness of any animal that is on earth, the likeness of any winged bird that flies in the air, the likeness of anything that creeps on the ground, the likeness of any fish that is in the water under the earth. And beware lest you raise your eyes to heaven when you see the sun and the moon and the stars and all the hosts of heaven, that you be drawn away and bow down to them and serve them, things that the Lord your God has allotted to all peoples under the whole heaven. So, really important point about why Israel's not to make images of God. I'm going to read you a passage from Isaiah in just a minute about this fact, but the idea right here is, thing number one, don't make for yourselves an image. Notice what's going on here. That is, what's going on, right, in all kind of pagan images of God, right? It's people kind of sitting around and thinking, you know what? What would you like God to be like? Okay? That's the thought here, right? And so, someone says, I've got it. God should be a man. He should be like 7 feet tall. He should have really enormous biceps and really great hair. That's what I think God should look like. And they all say, yeah, that sounds wonderful. Or, I think that God should be a woman and she should have blonde hair and, have a perfect figure and, on and on. Notice what's going on here. What this is doing, right, this is people creating God in their image rather than people living in the image of God. That's what we've got going on in this. So there's a big concern that's going on here. And also, of course, this warning about idols isn't just simply idle, I-D-L-E, I-D-O-L, clever play on words, right? Anyway, it's really important to kind of recognize, right, that this warning isn't without cause, right? Because we've already seen 2 instances of idolatry in Israel's history. Instance number 1, right, remember? The golden calf that's manufactured at the base of Mount Sinai, right? That is, once again, as people get together and they say, oh gosh, you know what? Let's think, we need to have something, some visible image of God. What do you think would be a great image? And somebody says, well, you know what? Back in Egypt, we worship these calves. Why don't we do one of those? The Egyptians obviously knew what they were talking about, so let's have a calf. And they'll say, great. And then remember, there was also the Baal of Peor that the people of Israel worshiped, this kind of storm fertility god who, today would sort of be doing like bodybuilding commercials on television. So the idea right here is that the thing that's really dangerous is when people start to think that God basically is simply sort of like a grandiose form of us. And of course that leads to the next thought, right? Well, if God is so very much like us, right, God must be behind the causes and things that we support. And then you've gone right from having God as a God to having God essentially as a mascot. And that's the concern here. Okay, that is, Israel is never to forget that the Lord is Lord and Israel is his possession. God is not Israel's mascot, although they sometimes treat God as if he were that. Now, let me read to you a passage from Isaiah 44, and we might not get much beyond this, but this is actually a great passage. It's Isaiah 44, 9 and following. It's Isaiah's criticism of idolatry, which Israel never ceased to practice. And so here it is, or here's part of it. All who fashion idols are nothing, and the things that they delight in do not profit. Their witnesses neither see nor know, that they may be put to shame. Who fashions a god or casts an idol that is profitable for nothing? Behold, all his companions shall be put to shame, and the craftsmen are only human. Let them all assemble them and send them forth. They shall be terrified, they shall be put to shame altogether. An ironsmith makes a cutting tool and works it over the coals. He fashions it with hammers and works it with a strong arm. He becomes hungry, and when his strength fails, he drinks no water and is faint. The carpenter stretches a line. He marks it out with a pencil. He shapes it with a plane and marks it with a compass. He shapes it into the figure of a man, with the beauty of a man to dwell in the house. He cuts down cedars that he chooses, a cypress tree or an oak, and lets it grow strong among the trees of the forest. He plants a cedar, and the rain nourishes it. Then it becomes fuel for a man. He takes a part of it and warms himself, and he kindles a fire and bakes bread, and he makes a god and worships it. So notice Isaiah sort of poking fun at idolatry, right? So it's kind of weird, right? Someone goes out and cuts down some wood, and with part of the wood, he builds a fire and cooks dinner. With the other part of the wood, he makes a god. What does that tell you? Right? Isaiah's kind of like poking fun at the whole business of it. He's saying it doesn't make any sense. Okay? So that's the warning here that's put before Israel. Now, I want to say just a word here, and this will be the last thing that I'll be able to say here because I'll need to run. We just want to look ahead for just a minute about the idea of God having an image. In Colossians 1, Paul's going to make a really important remark that we just at least want to be aware of. We don't have time to talk about it right now, but Paul's going to make a really important remark where he's going to say that Christ is the image of the invisible God. Notice what Paul's saying there. Paul's saying that what we have in Christ is not our image of what we think God should look like, but God's own image of himself that's presented to us. And therefore, it's a proper image. Okay? That is, what Paul's saying right here is that what God does in Christ is God provides us with his own image of himself and therefore liberates us from the awful business of creating images for ourselves. And we just want to think, right, what a shocking image that might be. It's right behind me. That is, in contrast, right, to all these sort of statues of various pagan gods and goddesses, right, all of whom are sort of equipped with all these sort of ideal human characteristics that, even people today still want. God's own image of himself is very, very, very different. And it's sort of like a warning, right? Before you begin to sort of imagine in your mind who you want God to be, pay very, very close attention to the cross, where God presents us with his own image of himself, and be careful. So we'll stop there, And we'll continue Deuteronomy 4 next week, and then we'll get into 5 and look at Deuteronomy's version of the Ten Commandments.